This week on the Communicators, a discussion about cybersecurity with Dave DeWalt, President and CEO of McAfee Incorporated.
Dave DeWalt is President and CEO of McAfee, and he is joining us from their company headquarters in Santa Clara, California. Mr. McAfee, if you would start off by giving us an overview of McAfee and your own background.
Sure, Peter. Dave DeWalt here, President and CEO, of course. McAfee is the largest dedicated security company. We are entirely focused on security, from consumers to corporations, governments. We do business in over 100 countries around the world. We've been in business about 23 years. We were one of the original inventors of antivirus by John McAfee way back in the 1990s. And of course, we're doing a nice job building this company up, focusing in on the security marketplace, and it's very complex. As a CEO, I've been here at McAfee just short of 4 years now. And in the 4 years I've been here, we have seen just tremendous change in the security space and tremendous change at McAfee. We went from really just an antivirus company with about 90% of our revenues in just one product area to really a full security company, network security, endpoint, mobile security, and really a complete architecture for security from consumers to corporations. So thank you for having me, and glad to be here.
Now, Mr. DeWalt, when you hear the term cybersecurity, what do you think?
What do I think of cybersecurity? Digital security. So certainly internet security, digital security, cybersecurity is what you think of when you think of that term. And it's really the protection of all things digital and all things in the cyber world, internet world, is really the core definition.
Jill Itoro of the Washington Business Journal joins us here at the table as well.
Yes. Thank you for sitting down and chatting with us. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Jill.
I'm going to start off with some company news that we heard about with the acquisition by Intel of McAfee. I'm just curious what this means for the company's technology portfolios. Does it change much in terms of the technology itself, or is this more just a uniting of two different companies to better serve the customer?
Well, Jill, I would tell you this is a great marriage between the two companies. I can't tell you how excited I am to kind of go to the next level with Intel. We've been working with Intel for more than 18 months prior to the announcement that we did in August to announce the merger. And we really had an opportunity to build a roadmap, build a strategy together as we announced the merger. And this is really, pretty much the same thing McAfee's been doing for many, many years. Really now an opportunity to go faster at that strategy. And Intel, as you know, is a company who really prides itself on innovation, on quality, and really it's a great honor for us at McAfee now to have security as one of the three pillars of really what Intel's trying to do in the marketplace. And when we made the announcement, they've been focusing in on power and performance and internet connectivity, and now to add security as a major pillar is exciting for all the McAfee employees. And of course, as we go into the next phase of our company's life cycle, we're looking forward to a lot of new products, a lot of new innovation, and new ways to solve some of the nastiest, most insidious security problems in the world. So we're not yet closed with the acquisition. We're still in the proposed merger state. We need regulatory approval yet to finish the acquisition. But when it does, we'll be announcing some new products and some new architectures that really have some great promise to make the world a safer place. And that's really our noble cause, if you will, as a company.
Is it a marriage of, just a quick follow-up on that, is it a marriage of resources and research, or might we actually see some security getting baked in at the processor level? Is that even possible?
Well, yeah, it's a combination of all those. Certainly resources are important. McAfee being a public company, we have certain resources that we can expand on, and we do that all over the world. But with Intel now, we have an opportunity to have even more. And not only is it financially accretive to Intel, so good for shareholders if you're an Intel shareholder, but also good for McAfee employees, because we get to innovate, we get to do more than we ever could before. And the insight, and particularly the insight from the silicon layer, is critical to solving some of the problems that we're seeing in the market. And those problems are things like what's called rootkits and malware that is essentially really below the operating system. And this is what gives us this new model opportunity is what we call hardware-enabled security. The architecture will be open to our competitors, both at the chip layer and the security layer, but this innovation is unique and I think long overdue, and we're excited to bring some new products and some new ways to solve, some of these challenges the world is facing, and we have a lot of them in the cyber world.
Dave DeWalt, in a recent op-ed in the Hill newspaper, you talked about strengthening cyber defense and gave some advice to the U.S. government. There were 3 points that you made, and I'd like you to expand on these. Number 1, define public and private partnership. Number 2, develop security standards and best practices collaboratively. And number 3, reform the Federal Information Security Management Act. If you could start by expanding on number 3.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what's called FISMA, as you just described, is legislation today that essentially can allow auditing and compliance for security architectures. And what we think we need to do is take the basis for some of the policies, some of the auditing, some of the compliance that's in place today and make it more robust and continue to extend what's already in place. For example, there's a lot of organizations and entities and agencies that adhere to FISMA today, but there's many that do not. And we need to extend FISMA to areas like critical infrastructure. That's critical for our national security, for all of the citizens of the United States security. Transportation, banking industries, energy, utilities, oil and gas are all really important areas of what we do. So how do we take an architecture and extend it to other critical areas of the organizations that are important to everyone in the world? And this could be extended beyond the borders of the United States as well. When we look globally, there's very little common architecture for how we can put security architectures in place worldwide. We need to evolve to a better architecture and a better compliance model. Each country does it different. Each organization, each agency even does it different. So how do we evolve is really key. And that goes to the first point or two that you mentioned, Peter, as well, is we need standards. And standards are critical. In most IT areas, we have standards. Think about the database with what's called SQL, just ways to query the database. Think about other areas that involve standardization bodies who regulate how and which we architect our products. Security doesn't have that. We need to continue to evolve that. In many ways, McAfee's taken this on our own. We built an architecture that's open. We involve a lot of third-party security companies that can interoperate with our architecture, but we need to advance that to an industry level as well. And that just is really important in today's environment. And the critical part of that is really number 1 that you mentioned too, public and private partnership. We have to do this together. To have standards, to have compliance, to have architectures, has to be collaborated together, government and commercial. And we're doing that. We're making good progress, I think, worldwide on our public and private partnerships. The United States government's been great at reaching out to the whole private sector to get input, but we got to keep evolving. How do we get those standards in place? How do we collaboratively work together to evolve what we've got to do, which is protect ourselves more than we are today?
Dave, you mentioned expanding FISMA, but there's been quite a bit of criticism of FISMA in the sense that it's somewhat of a paper-pushing exercise. There have been efforts to fix that, focusing more on continuous monitoring and so forth. Have they gone far enough, and beyond the efforts by the administration to fix FISMA, are the agencies following up, and is the cultural change within the agencies happening enough that they're actually also changing how they approach security? I mean, is FISMA where it needs to be to really address the security weaknesses that are out there right now?
Well, Jill, you hit right on the point that I think is frustrating for everybody. Is FISMA in many cases is very onerous, and in many ways very challenging for agencies, entities, and government to adhere to. And that's one of the challenges. We need to streamline it. We make it need to be easier to understand. And one of the problems is education around it. Most organizations don't know exactly what it is they need to adhere to because it's been evolving. But that's okay from my vantage point. It's a starting point, and I'm encouraged to see that we have some foundation in place. But like anything, we need to evolve it. And we need to make it easier to adapt, easier to use, easier to adhere to. And that's the next most important phase that we're in. Keep working together with private industry who can provide tools that can help organizations adhere to FISMA, but make it easier for them. So again, like you said, public-private relationship and ability to respond to standards and architectures is really the couple of components needed to make it all better.
And it's interesting, you mentioned the tools. You hear so many complaints in terms of how long it takes federal agencies to procure those tools and to buy them from industry, from companies like yourself. I think, the Defense Department said it took 81 months from the time when a program was first envisioned to the time where it becomes operational. I mean, by then, you know, technology is 3 generations old. So what needs to change in terms of how government buys the technology to allow a company like McAfee to better serve the agencies to improve the security?
Well, you're pointing out another challenge. If the FISMA process and the certification process takes too long and the buying process takes too long, you know, it's a challenge. And certainly the world of security is very dynamic. We see new mobile devices, new operating platforms, new architectures emerging every day, new challenges. You know, we just saw WikiLeaks. We see some of the problems emerging in those ways, and we have to respond quickly. So, you know, part of this is to create, again, private-public relationships where we can very quickly certify our products to be used in government. We need great ways to audit those products once they're deployed. And it's just speed and mobility that I think is the missing aspect that we don't have today. And we're working on it, and I can tell you many examples where, you know, we were able to use the proper processes to make procurement a whole lot less than 81 months, but at the same time, you know, we have to keep working on that speed. It is an important part. Nimbleness and the ability to procure in the world of security is a quintessential component to making sure we are secure.
And you know, you bring up WikiLeaks, can't resist following up on that one, needless to say. A lot of people would argue that was not a failure of technology, but a failure of process in terms of how those documents were exposed and released from federal government. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with ensuring the proper technology is in place, which I think you and I would argue is not the case yet, but also ensuring that the people that are within the agencies are following the proper procedures to ensure that the security, you know, is top notch and that the tools are being used as they should?
Well, Jill, you just hit on it. You know, there's really 3 things that you always see when you have a problem. You either have a lack of, you know, kind of a process, a lack of a product, or, you know, some sort of lack of people or some sort of breakdown in the people side. And really, in this case with WikiLeaks, we saw the people break down a bit because certainly an insider caused some of these, you know, leaks. We saw a breakdown in the process. In this particular case, some of the product was even in place that could block this. But in the world of cybersecurity, we're seeing the evolution of these threats come in each of those vectors. And if you don't fix each of those areas, having the state-of-the-art products, state-of-the-art process, and education to people, you're not going to be able to, you know, prevent these things from occurring. So what we learned from WikiLeaks is we got to improve our process. And this was a good lesson for everyone in this particular case, is what rights of access do personnel have? How do we continue to audit and monitor employees who do have access to classified content? How do we make sure that we have quick ways to resolve it if there is a process breach or an employee breach? And these are the things that I think we're learning as we go on. And of course, we'll see more of these, without a doubt. In the world of data today, it's so mobile, it's on so many devices. You know, we need to improve all those areas in order to be more effective in the future.
Dave DeWalt, you talked a little bit earlier about the borderlessness of the cyber world. Can you speak a little bit more about that and how that conflicts or works with 100 and some different national governments?
Yeah, I mean, borderless. I mean, what is the internet today? The internet is borderless. It's global. It's one of the greatest treasures we've had in the 21st century and the 20th century is this development of the internet. And it has tremendous appeal to capitalism, to our ability to grow our commerce and our gross national products all over the world. It's been phenomenal. But the other edge to that has been securing that internet. And how do we secure both privacy as well as the ability to invoke crime or even terrorism or even warfare on the internet? And so we need governments to work together. And this is probably the biggest challenge the world is facing, in my opinion, moving forward is how to cooperate together as a global community to secure what is becoming fundamentally as important as anything else that we have in the world is the internet. So we have to eradicate the crime that's online. We need to work together to proper law in place. We need to have borders that are really seamless now to find really, the criminals that are out there and put them behind bars. And of course, it's very virtual in the way crime works online. The same with terrorism. The terrorism is moving, from physical to cyber. And again, it's going to challenge us as global governments to work better together in order to solve these problems. We've made some progress, but again, we have a long way to go. We haven't really ratified a lot of the legislation that's been put in place in the world today, and we need to continue to evolve to do it. It's just a key, I think, to our next generation in able to solve some of these challenges.
I also wanted to follow up on your comment about wireless. You were recently quoted as saying mobility or wireless is our #1 focus right now. What did you mean by that?
Well, we're certainly seeing an explosion in mobile devices. I'm sure for you, Peter and Jill, you probably have some new devices that you've probably acquired in the last few months. We've seen a tremendous explosion of new device types, and Apple made this, obviously famous in the last 6-9 months with the launch of the tablets and the iPads and the iPhones. And the world is changing very quickly, especially in large governments and large corporations, where what once was really largely Windows endpoint devices that most employees and most citizens would use is now being evolved to smart devices like tablets and phones. So for McAfee, we're focused where the threat is. And our goal is to protect whatever consumers or employees use. And now employees are using more and more of these types of devices. So just in the last 6 months, we've really created a very strategic imperative as a company to protect these devices. We've acquired 2 companies, state-of-the-art companies that can do this. We've evolved our own product roadmap to be much more focused on the world of mobile computing. We've developed partnerships with telecommunications companies, mobile operators, mobile device makers to really bring what we've done really good job in the PC Windows world to the mobile world as well. So in 2011, we've really seen the mobile environment as probably our biggest threat. And of course, from a security point of view, we need to protect that threat. And we're focused on it, and we have a lot of solutions to offer the marketplace as a result.
This is C-SPAN's Communicators program. Our guest is Dave DeWalt, who is President and CEO of McAfee. Also joining us here in Washington, Jill Itoro of the Washington Business Journal.
Dave, I'm going to follow up a bit on what you just were talking about. Beyond the mobile devices, we see a big transition to social media that's been growing all the more widespread in the last couple of years. We saw a cover of Time magazine, of course, honor the CEO of Facebook recently. And at the same time, there's also cloud computing, which even the federal government now announced a cloud-first strategy. A lot of people question the security of both social media as well as cloud computing. Can those 2 new mediums be secure? And is it a smart strategy for federal government to be adopting both?
Well, the short answer is it absolutely can be secure. And like anything, we see the first phases, the first rollouts of new types of platforms or operating systems or applications as probably the most vulnerable. And that was the case for social networking as well, social media applications. It's the case for mobile that we were just discussing as well. So those first architectures tend to be the most vulnerable. However, in the last year or so, we've really seen a concerted effort by most of the major application providers to increase their security posture. Certainly Facebook has been a great partner of McAfee's now. They've really viewed it as a socially responsible area to meet, and they've really upped their architecture, and we've really seen a much less insecure environment for Facebook as we've ever seen before, and they're improving. It's still vulnerable, it still needs to evolve, but certainly we haven't seen those types of DOS attacks on a Twitter or malware virus spreading on Facebook as we once had seen. And they're improving every day. Again, it could still happen, of course, because the bad guys are always thinking of new ways to penetrate these systems. But I believe they're secure. They're as secure as a lot of applications are today. And to your point, Jill, cloud computing is essentially the next generation model that we're all using, not just in ways that we can protect citizens and employees around the world, but also how in which the applications will be performed. So cloud computing is a quintessential component of our strategy, as well as I think governments in their ability to deploy applications quicker and easier in the marketplaces. So I think this is evolving very well, and of course cloud computing is a great way for us to help protect better than we've ever done before.
And I always hear people say how important it is to bake security in at the development stage, where from the get-go, before it's in use, getting security incorporated in rather than treating it almost like an afterthought. Do you see technology companies increasingly going that route? Because, I would argue they hadn't done that in the past. They would call upon McAfee perhaps after the product was already out there and being sold. So do you see improvement in the market?
I do, and you hit it right on it, Jill. That's the challenge is, in the race for, attention, for eyeballs, and for impressions, and certainly architectures like security aren't always put into the first versions of the product. So later they start thinking about those security architectures, and certainly now, like you said earlier, we're now starting to see that for social media type applications. But it goes back to an earlier point, which is we need standards. We need ways in which we can build these architectures more securely before they're mass deployed. So baking security in is really one of the most important things we can do. What is the standards for which we can deploy these applications? How do we make sure they're safe? It's almost like a good housekeeping seal needs to be created, like we've done for power or the underwriter's lab. You always see the UL seal of approval that says, yes, it's safe to use this appliance. By having these capabilities where, yes, it's safe to use an application, it is a great way for consumers to feel comfortable that these are secure. And in case in point, we've launched a service in the last year called McAfee Secure, where we secure websites. And if you ever see a McAfee Secure trust mark on a website, you know that it's already been tested for security. And we're trying to bring these types of standards to the world of the internet in a way that allows us to have a good housekeeping seal, if you will, for computing online. And others in the security industry are doing that, but we're just evolving to the point where vendors are looking for security providers to take this kind of service mainstream. And we're hoping this takes off for everyone because it's important.
Dave DeWalt, what kind of work have you or McAfee done for the NSA or for the CIA?
Well, they're certainly a customer, as is governments around the world. The intelligence communities are important to not only McAfee, but all the security industry. In McAfee's case, we see defense and intelligence as a critical customer community. We work together with the United States governments as well as governments all over the world, just as we would with large banks or large telecommunications companies. These companies oftentimes are the ones that are attacked the most. And in McAfee's case, being a dedicated security company, we want to protect the ones who are attacked the most. And in this case, we are good partners, good customers, and hopefully those agencies would say the same thing. We try to collaboratively partner with them to create solutions for the security industry.
Dave, relating to that, there's been talk by the Defense Department as well as civilian agencies about incorporating security requirements into the procurement stage, where they'll say to industry, here's what we want to purchase, you need to get certain security standards met before we'll even consider your proposal. There's some in industry that don't like that. They feel it's government dictating too much in terms of development and what they need to do with their own products. How do you feel about that? Should security be rolled into the purchasing process for federal government, especially when you talk about agencies like NSA, who has a lot to protect?
Well, Jill, in many ways there is certain certifications that are required, particularly for security products today. We go through pretty extensive testing of our products, and again, this is where the public and private partnership work out. Certainly to have our products on GSA and some of the procurement program models, we have to meet certifications. And we do that. But to your point, could we do more? Yes. Certainly when we look at the supply chain and we look at products that are acquired into the government, sometimes those are the critical areas that we need to make sure are secure. And when we look at those environments, many times the procurement process doesn't have security standards for lots of products that are acquired. They do for security in some areas, but let's say they just buy a mobile phone or a PC or a USB stick. Is it secure? And how do we create a proper balance between keeping the speed for procurement, but also keeping the safety there too? And those are the important areas for us to advance as we move forward. So I'm all in favor of a little bit more security posture, clearly, when we're procuring, and a little bit more certification for that. I think it's needed.
So should the onus be on industry to ensure that the products through the supply chain come from a reliable source? I know that it's difficult because these days the supply chain comes from across the globe. Should that be on industry to make sure that their products that are being used within their development meet certain security standards?
I think it can be, Jill. I mean, certainly in many parts of our high-tech communities, we already have standards like that for safety. And, you know, again, I use the power example where you have safety standards that have to be built right into your product. Doing a little bit more for security is certainly something the industry should take responsibility for. But again, it goes back to what's missing in the world of security, standards. And again, we as an industry need to evolve a bit to create standards that allow us to have certain levels of security architecture baked right into the products that we deliver, and force all vendors selling to government to adhere to those standards. And again, we don't have that. And that's another level that I have for advice is always we need that kind of standard created, built, and certainly as one company and one person, I'd help lead that if we could.
Dave DeWalt, do you find that Washington understands Silicon Valley and vice versa?
You know, some days we do. Certainly we have a lot of relationship there, particularly as a high-tech community. I'm involved with a number of groups, what we call the Silicon Valley Leadership Group here. We meet with Washington and with congressmen and women and senators pretty regularly. I'm involved with what's called the Business Roundtable as well, a collection of CEOs of the largest companies. We have a great public-private interlock there as well, where we're always seeking to understand one another. And it can always be better, but you know, certainly we do have a good relationship. I think that relationship's getting better. I'm really encouraged by the work the BRT has done, the work that the Silicon Valley Leadership Group has done to really, you know, create education on both sides. But again, like anything, you know, things are dynamic. We need to keep evolving, and I think Washington could always be improving, but I'm encouraged by what we're doing too.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. Dave DeWalt is the president and CEO of McAfee. Jill Itoro, senior reporter with the Washington Business Journal. Thank you both for being on the Communicator.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.